One night I was falling asleep and I felt my limbs lock up. It's relatively normal at the time, so I tried not to panic as a shape began to creep towards me. It had wide eyes and no mouth. My eyes were half open and I was unable to glance around. Then I heard a rattling noise. I figured it was part of the hallucination, so I disregarded it. After these noises, a click and a squeak sounded. I heard what sounded like a thump of a heavy body hit the floor. The part that alarmed me most was when I saw a silhouette cross in front of the foot of the bed. To my understanding, most apparitions seem to float or glide. I'd never seen one that walked before. This figure then walked out of my sight, and I heard another squeaky noise. It sounded similar to a door opening. Then I heard a low thump away from my room. The dark shapes and visions continued, and after what seemed like forever, the figure crossed back to where it originally came from. After that, I hadn't seen it for the rest of the sleep paralysis. The next day, my alarm went off and I got out of bed. When I got out of bed, I realized my door was open. I swore I closed it before I went to bed. When I turned to grab some clothes from my closet, I also saw that the window was open. At this point, I started to freak out. Either my mom had come in and the sleep paralysis had altered my vision, or someone had actually been in our house. I finished changing and walked upstairs to the kitchen, where my mom explained that the night before, we had been robbed. Anytime you experience sleep paralysis, it's definitely scary, but when you experience it as a kid for the first time, there's something more terrifying about it. This happened when I was around 12 years old. It was in the middle of the night at my house. During the weekend, my dad would work the night shift, and since it was the weekend, I had stayed up most of the night. It was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and my dad had told me to lock the doors and go to sleep, which I did. I went to my room and finally went to sleep, but only for what seemed like an hour. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking on my back door. It scared me awake. After taking a few moments to process what I heard, I decided it was probably just my dad knocking on the door. Maybe he forgot something. He had a house key though, so why was he knocking? But the knocking continued. It was pretty creepy, then the next thing I knew, the knocking stopped. And then it started again, but at a different location. Someone was knocking on the window in my kitchen. I continued to assure myself it was my dad. I didn't understand why he couldn't just unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him. I felt pretty freaked out, so I wasn't answering the door. If anything, my dad would call me to open the door. And the knocking started again, at another window. I was terrified now, too scared to get up and check who was out there. The knocking wasn't stopping, and the next thing I know, the knocking moved to my front door, at a louder level. Kind of like a banging knock. That's when it hit me that I couldn't move. I couldn't scream or talk or move any muscle. My heart dropped as the knocking moved to another window closer and closer to my bedroom window, where my curtains were see-through. I still couldn't move. I didn't know what to do or say. I moved my eyes over the window and my heart stopped when I saw a man peering through my window. A tall man with a dark ski mask. I could hardly make out the details because it was so dark, but I think his mask had some sort of skeleton design on it. He tilted his head slightly. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I closed my eyes and started telling myself it wasn't real, over and over again. I opened my eyes and there was no one there. A sigh of relief came over me until I heard a loud whisper that told me they were going to cut me. Everything suddenly stopped. I couldn't move again. Finally, I woke up, and I really couldn't sleep anymore that night. It didn't feel like a dream. I never experienced sleep paralysis before. Everything just felt so real. I don't know what happened, but I pray I'll never have to experience that again. It was one of the most frightening moments in my life. I think it was real, but I'm not sure. The following morning, I had asked my dad, when he came back from work, if he came back earlier that day and knocked on the doors. Turns out, he didn't. Usually I only experience sleep paralysis when I sleep on my back, specifically at night. For some odd reason, it never happened when I took naps during the day. It doesn't happen, which I am thankful for, but this time it did. Anyway, the most terrifying time was when I slept on my chest during the day, on my couch in the living room. Every single incident was at night except this one. My wife and I were arguing on the way home from church, and she took the kids to her mother's for the day so we could both calm down. I chose to take a nap and woke up around 2 p.m. unable to move, only this time, I felt that my right leg was slightly elevated. Each of my experiences beforehand were different in that I was being held down and choked by a dark silhouette. I would try to yell, but nothing would come out. I would panic and begin to pray, and then it would let me go and leave. This time, though, it dragged me off the couch and was yanking me violently, with my face down in broad daylight, where I could not see it. I truly thought this thing was finally going to kill me. I prayed that God would protect me, and he did. A veil of darkness lifted from the room. From where I was on the floor, I could see the sunlight from the window shift forward several inches. There was a handprint on my ankle, from where it grabbed me and dragged me. It had 5 fingers like the hands of a person. I had a large terrier mix at the time, and he was clawing at the back door and growling like I had never heard him before. I let him in the house, and he was snarling and baring his teeth, running from room to room, chasing something that I could not see. I had heavy footprints on my wooden floor. I watched my dog chase after this thing to the corner of my yard, and it wasn't until he came back that I realized he had almost clawed halfway through a 2-inch thick wooden door, trying to get in to protect me. I blessed my home with oil that same day, and I haven't had trouble since. This was in 2012. My dog passed a year later of old age, but I got my girls a dog named Jax, and he sleeps in their room every night. I'd rather he be there with them if this thing ever returns.